Thank you for joining today's webinar. If you are hoping to be at a Fathom webinar about getting beyond topics in your thematic coding to be able to go deeper into your open-ended analysis, then you are in the right place. My name is Tova. I'm one of the founders here at Fathom. Thank you for joining us. And I'm also joined by Jen, who leads the Theme and Insights team here at Fathom, which means she is the human in the loop or leading the human in the loop team when you use Fathom Magic and has also done a ton of open ends. So for those of you that don't know Fathom, we are a platform to understand people through really advanced text analytics and thematic coding with the power of really accurate and actionable thematic coding and text analytics. And we've supported a lot of brands and agencies. We work with both sides and helping them to save time and resources, be able to get really nuanced custom code frames out of your open-ended data, and to be able to analyze all of that open-ended data in a really powerful and delightful analytics interface, all of which helps to streamline reporting. And importantly, we are always human in the loop, whether you're working with Fathom Magic or Fathom Pro. We can talk more about that later. It's always human in the loop. So always the intersection of human and AI. We're not going to talk a lot about what Fathom is today. Mostly we're going to talk about thematic coding and open-ended analysis and how to do a great job getting beyond topics and into something deeper, but just to have you have an understanding of where we're coming from and what we're bringing to this. We work with folks across the spectrum, both agencies and brands. I won't read all of this, but just so that you hopefully trust we know what we're talking about at least a little bit. And before Fathom, there was Avalanche. Jen and I actually worked together at Avalanche. And importantly, Avalanche was an agency that pioneered mixed methods at scale. So we did large scale surveys, think 10,000 respondents with lots of really strategic open ends in order to be able to achieve qualitative depth with quantitative rigor. And what we really focused on was being able to answer the why, to get beyond the sort of quant variables and understand the why that was driving those. And in particular, we worked on breakthrough insights in really complex issues. And that's important because that meant we had to code a lot of really nuanced, complicated data that required incredibly good thematic analysis. And through that process, we ended up building the core tech that then turned into Fathom, which is now the platform that other researchers can use. So we're bringing all of that experience, all of that learning, all of the hard lessons along the way to what we're able to share with you. Because now at Fathom, we have a front row seat to what works and what doesn't as we process sort of millions of verbatims for top researchers across the spectrum that we just looked at. So what do we talk about today? The first thing we're going to talk about is what is a good code frame? We're going to talk about that from both a technical and a strategic point of view in order to give you some structure, some framework to be able to think through your code frames. We're going to talk about 3 levers that are used to create and analyze code frames well. Those are themes, the organizational structure, and the interactions that you might want in your analytics. We'll come back to lots of that. It'll be sort of a lot of what we're talking through today. We're going to talk about how to norm coding excellence across your team. We know a lot of teams have traditionally outsourced thematic coding and are now bringing that in-house. And so that means building norms, often on quant teams, often with folks who maybe aren't in qual all the time, to be able to norm really excellent thematic coding and open-ended analysis. We have a fun example to put it all together for you. Not so much a case study, but some really fun data to see how some of these frameworks and best practices can come together. And we will do a just mini lightning demo of Fathom. I can see from the attendee list that about a third of you are already part of our Fathom community. So we will keep that really light. But for those of you who have never seen the platform, we will give you just a little peek of it at the very end. So let's dive in. First things first, what is a good code frame?
Thanks, Tova. So what's a good code frame? In order to get rich analysis of raw data that is actually useful, we need to implement a good code frame, obviously. So what does that mean? That means that the code frame needs to be accurate. So responses should be tagged to all of their appropriate themes, and responses should not have tags to themes that they don't actually belong in. The code frame also needs to be detailed and nuanced, and that means it needs to be granular enough that all mutually exclusive themes are captured, and nuanced enough that subtle differences or key points are reflected in how those themes are named and grouped together. And the code frame also needs to be strategically aligned, which means that it should, 1, answer the actual question that was posed, and 2, more broadly, help to answer your overarching research questions. There are a few levers that we can use to make a good code frame. So we can begin with the themes themselves, which are the most granular building blocks of the code frame. Then we have the organization, which is the grouping of those themes into a hierarchy. And then also we can add interactions into the mix. So interacting different variables with each other. And this really needs to be considered all the way back at the beginning of your survey design. What kinds of variables do you want to interact together? What cuts of the data is going to be interesting for your strategic goals? And then we have to hold that in our heads when we're making our good code frames. For these levers to work, again, strategic alignment, we need to make sure business strategies is applied to each. And we'll talk a little bit later about what that actually means. And these principles for making a good code frame are applied regardless of which of the myriad cases that we can use qualitative research for. So whether it's to understand values, emotions, and beliefs that drive behavior, or uncovering the why behind pure numbers, or measuring and tracking awareness among audiences, evaluating the resonance of messaging, mapping customer journeys or experiences and relating them to KPIs like revenue, or general exploration research and identifying emerging trends that quantitative research alone wouldn't be able to do. So we'll go into strategically aligned code frames, and Tova's gonna talk a little bit more about that.
Awesome. So a good code frame needs to be strategically aligned. But what do we mean by that? The simplest way that I think about what that means is that the code frame should help answer your goals and it should answer your business questions and your research questions. So right from the beginning, we like to think of that as 3 bullet points. What decision do you need to be able to make? The decision you need to be able to make, the business decision you need to be able to make should inform the code frame. What research questions do you need to answer in order to make that business decision? Obviously, that's going to be the most important part. And are there hypotheses you need to prove or disprove? All of those things are going to inform what you need to map, how it needs to be organized, and how it needs to come together, be able to interact in order to be able to answer those questions. So that's sort of the first lens towards strategy. The second piece informed by that is a framework. What do I need to map in order to answer those questions? Do you need topics, that really traditional nouny things that are being discussed? Do you need to understand emotions, the emotional drivers, the emotional experiences, the emotions that are coming through in the responses? Do you need to understand the experiences, more like journeys and stories, the experiences that are being shared in the open-ended responses? Do you need to understand the values, the deeply held belief systems that are informing perspective or opinions? Do you need to understand behaviors, what people are actually doing, what parts of a product they are touching, what jobs to be done they are doing? Any one of those frameworks could be applied to many data sets, and sometimes you want a couple of frameworks in order to be able to answer the question. There's no right or wrong. It has to do with being able to answer those 3 questions: business goals, research goals, hypotheses you need to prove or disprove. And lastly, considering comparability. Do you need to be able to compare the distribution of themes, maybe between segments, maybe in a concept or a message test or a product test, between A/B tests, maybe between waves over time, longitudinal or tracking data? And the reason that that's important to consider at this point is because that decides whether or not you need to hold a code frame stable. Are you creating something that needs to be replicable, or is it created really to maximize the descriptiveness of the data in front of you? Based on the answer to those 3 structures, you can then align your methodology with your strategic goals. And that happens kind of on 2 levels. So is it deductive or inductive? Is it ground up from the data, or are you imposing a framework, or some combination of both? Maybe you need to do both things to the same data set. We'll talk about that in just a second. Is it explicit? Is it that sort of surface level meaning? Do you need to know literally what people are talking about? Or do you want that implicit meaning, the underlying meanings that are sort of below the surface? So do you want semantic or latent? Again, lots of good options. It comes back to your goals, which is going to help you to answer your strategic questions. One thing that we see regularly is that it's pretty common to default to semantic and topics. And I think that comes from old school text analytics when topic modeling was what we could do. People aren't rational. We know from all the cognitive science and behavioral economics that all of the smart people in the world have done that humans aren't rational decision makers. And so that semantic topic doesn't always go deep enough to help us really understand what the drivers of behavior are. What are the motivations, the emotions, the values and experiences that are driving behavior, driving the outcomes that we are often after, regardless of whether we're looking at public opinion or brand research or product experience, any of those sorts of things, customer experience. Often what we want is a little below the surface. So important to not sort of start at that place and just stop there and think about how do we go a little deeper, which that's why you're here. So let's talk about how that comes together then into the nuance, detail, and accuracy that you need.
Amazing. So we're first going to dive into what accurate themes require, and in sum, it's the following. So themes should be comprehensive, which simply means all existing themes in the raw data should exist in the code frame, and all relevant responses for each of those themes should be tagged into the theme accordingly. How comprehensive your code frame needs to be really depends on your own survey goals. For example, at Fathom, we have a rule of if 1% or more of responses are talking about a theme, then that theme is going to exist in our code frame. For accuracy, there should also be sufficient multi-coding. So multi-coding is basically if a response mentions, for example, 3 distinct different ideas, it needs to be tagged into all 3 of those corresponding themes. And you can imagine with a larger data set or a data set that's super complex with complex responses, this can actually be one of the more challenging and time-consuming things to get right. So that should be an area of focus, especially for data sets like that. Next, tagging accuracy means there are no false negatives or false positives. So in other words, responses should be tagged to all of the themes they belong to and should not be tagged to any themes that they do not belong to. A little bit of a mental cartwheel there. Another way to think about that is just in terms of level of error. So this level of error should be kept as low as possible in our code frame. And finally, descriptive naming means that themes should be named in a way that reflects the language of the responses that exist in that theme, but also in a way that answers the question that was posed. For us, there's also a metric of themes being nuanced and detailed, which may seem like one and the same, but are actually 2 distinct metrics for us. So detailed themes are themes that are granular enough or mutually exclusive and distinct enough to be strategically useful. And on the other hand, nuanced themes are themes that reflect the context and the language of the responses, and they should reflect the subtle differences or key points. And we have some examples later on to highlight the difference between the two. The next order of business after creating all of our good nuanced detailed themes is organizing them into groups. So a good code frame is organized to create meaning. And what's really interesting in qualitative research and kind of mind-blowing is that different organization of the same raw data of the same themes in a different way can actually reveal different insights, which makes holding strategic alignment in this step super important. And again, we'll have examples of what that actually looks like later on. For us, good organization requires 2 things. So one, the code frame at the highest level should hold together conceptually, and taken together, the groups and the themes should answer a strategic question. So personally for me, when I'm coding, I like to check this idea of holding together conceptually by popping into the chart view in our Fathom tool and clicking into different themes and also different groups and reading through those tagged responses that are under each. And then asking myself as I'm skimming through, do these responses belong together? Do any of them stick out like a sore thumb? If there's any ones that stick out like a sore thumb, I probably need to go back and take a look. And those responses probably need to be taken out and tagged elsewhere. The second thing is a nested hierarchy in our organization. So in other words, themes that belong together should be added to the same group. And we'll end up with a code frame basically that has a first level of our granular themes, which are the building blocks that are grouped together sensibly, which then make up our higher level of theme groupings. And finally, when digging deeper into qualitative insights, we can add in interactions into the mix. So code frames for open-ended questions can be sliced with quantitative variables like demographics, NPS scores, purchasing likelihood, partisanship, revenue, the list goes on. And then a code frame from one open-ended question can also be sliced with another code frame from another open-ended question for mixed analysis or things like audience segmentation or development of those really rich audience archetypes. And then there's also predictive analytics, and this is basically used to find correlations and causations between different variables. We're not going to be talking about this today because it is advanced analytics and we don't want to go down a tangent, but just calling this out to say these kinds of more advanced analytics can only be achieved when we have good code frames to work with. So now we'll go into our really fun, timely example, and Tova's going to walk us through this.
Clearly, you and I had too much fun with the timely
We
example.
did.
A really fun, timely example. So over the weekend with our good friends at TrueDot, thank you TrueDot for fielding this for us. We fielded a short survey with, I think, 6 open ends in it and a couple of quant variables, understanding audience perceptions and awareness and reactions to the Sydney Sweeney Has Great Genes ad campaign. If you haven't yet seen this ad campaign, you are in the minority. I can share with you that 57% of Americans have seen some aspect of this campaign, but it is a little bit controversial for a number of reasons that will become clear as we look at the open-ended data. Want to be super clear that we are not doing a case study. This is not a full analysis. We might release one next week because there's some pretty interesting data in here, or we're just using this data to bring to life and make concrete some of the principles that we have been talking about throughout this. So again, fielded this on, I think, Sunday, got data back on Monday. Jen and I coded really quickly yesterday, ran it through Fathom, and it's working with a sample of just over 1,000 responses. And let's have a look at some of what we saw. So the first question that we're going to look at is, what do you think of when you hear my genes are blue or she has good genes? And here we're really going to look at the principles of nuance, detail, and inductive coding. So this is unaided awareness, inductively coded with that level of both detail, granularity, and nuance, reflective language that accurately maps those associations. You can see a couple things that don't feel surprising. 40% of people talking about genes, quality, and fashion. I'm sure American Eagle is happy to hear that. And also celebrity and brand references by 20% of folks. So they may be a little bit unhappy to hear 5% of people talked about Levi's. That's neither here nor there for this particular example, though. Underneath of that, though, we start to get some more interesting themes. And so Jen talked about groups and about themes. And here we have attractiveness. And within that, we see sounds like a compliment. So those my genes are blue or she has good genes, it sounds like a compliment. It's about physical attractiveness and about sex appeal. Those are 3 different ways of thinking about attractiveness. Maybe more interesting and more important is this theme here, genes and genes associations. Great example of something that could not have been created ahead of time and needed to come up from the data. You wouldn't know to look for that theme. And the nuance in the 2 sub-themes underneath of that. 10% of folks talking about a genetics interpretation, really leaning into, think this is about genetics and eugenics, and there's something going on there. And another 8% of people just talking about the wordplay. There's a fun wordplay. There's something that, sort of fun in the wordplay and the way that they've played with that. I also want to draw your attention to the it's nothing. And the reason for this is because when we talk about the importance of nuance in the theme names, this is really brings it to life. So we often see in a data set a theme that might be called nothing or NA or none. And we generally assume that that means I have no response to this. I have no association with this. But here, there's a theme that emerged called explicit nothing responses. And explicit nothing responses sit much more in the category of it's nothing, as in it's not concerning, it's not a big deal. Ambiguous, dismissive responses, and this explicit nothingness, nothing. And so that becomes really important in terms of understanding how people are relating to this theme with this very first question, and helps to bring to life, hopefully, the power of detail and nuance in creating code frames inductively from scratch. Then we ask, cool, how does the ad make you feel? We now know what you associate with the ad. How does it make you feel? Here we're going to look at deductive coding, organized in 2 ways. One of the things Jen just talked about is you can organize things in a couple different ways and lead to different outcomes. So let's look at what happens with this. So when we talk about the feelings that you have, how the campaign makes you feel, this first organization is organized based on sentiment. And hopefully this looks pretty familiar. You are relatively familiar with the sentiment structure. And when we do this, we can see that 52% of people have a neutral or negative sentiment about the campaign, and 44% of people have a positive sentiment. And again, you can see the nuance and detail, the specific emotions that are attached to that. That might not be great news for the campaign. But when we organize this around an emotional activation is a slightly different way of organizing sentiments, same themes, different organization. And what it gives us is actually a really cool insight into virality, because emotional activation is what drives behavior. Positive, negative, you may or may not act. Emotional activation are the emotions that lead you to take action, and the emotions that inhibit action, that make you probably sit back and not take action. And what we see there is that 55% of people have activating emotions, 42% of people have inhibiting emotions, and within the activating, we have more emotions that are positive than negative, but we have some negative. And that, friends, is virality, because that means that there are some people who are offended and angry who are going to be talking about the fact that they are offended and angry, but more people who are joyful, delighted, and appreciative who are going to jump in and defend that because they are also activated. And so when we talk about why this campaign, why do 57% of Americans know about this campaign? This is part of why, is because we can look at this emotional activation and understand what's going on there. But why does it make you feel that way? Why is it so activating for people? And so here we're going to look at frameworks and segmentation. We talked about a while back in the presentation, we talked about using different frameworks in order to map data in different ways. So we're going to look at that. And then also what happens when we start to segment the data. One of the things that Jen talked about is that that's not really part of a code frame, but it's an important consideration, those interactions, as you're building your code frame, because obviously that's going to become a part of your analysis. So in order to replicate that virality, we have a hypothesis that American Eagle would need to understand why the ad was so emotionally resonant. And to do that, we're going to take an inductive and semantic code frame in order to understand the parts. What aspects of the ad are resonating? What are the specific parts people are talking about? We're going to use a deductive and latent code frame in order to map the values. What beliefs and values do people hold that they are seeing the ad through that is leading to those emotions? And then we're going to segment that by attribute in order to look at things like buying attention and personas and all of those fun things. We're not going to do a lot of that because, like Jen said, this isn't analysis, though I promise you she and I geeked out more than is probably healthy until all hours of the last night on this data. So when we start with that first one, we're looking at descriptive themes. This is the parts, the attributes of the ad that are jumping out to people. And the question that we asked specifically was, why do you feel that way? Tell us something about you and your perceptions about this advertisement to help us understand. Great example of a question that really starts to elicit narrative and asks people to tell some stories, to talk about their personal beliefs in order to get the kinds of responses we know are going to be able to give us things like a values map. But first, let's stop and look at the descriptive parts. So a couple things that jump out. That attractiveness and appeal, again, at 37%. And within that, we see in particular the positive appeal of the campaign and model attractiveness as being the two things that are really leading there. We also see 34% of people talking about it's just not that controversial. It's just an ad. This is really interesting. It connects back to what we talked about at the very beginning. It's nothing. It's that defensiveness about the ad. On the flip side, we also see 13% of people saying it's offensive and harmful, and in particular talking about sexualization and racial controversy. And then finally, 18% of people really just talking about the brand, the product, their loyalty to it, love for American Eagle jeans, and about their personal identity and context. So this is already segmented to likely to purchase. So this is the associations that people who are likely to purchase American Eagle at some point in the future have told us they have with the ad. And it's just the descriptive parts. When we segment that, though, into those who like the ad, those who feel neutral about the ad, and those who dislike the ad, this really starts to come alive in some interesting ways. Both the likes and the neutrals tell us about it not being that controversial. It's just an ad. And the neutrals in particular, it's just an ad. And we can see that that's probably important to them because they also recognize it might be offensive or harmful, but it's just an ad. We don't need to take ourselves that seriously. The people are really driven by this attractiveness and appeal, right? The model attractiveness, the appeal of the ad, 44% of them. It's the most cited theme by that group of people. And importantly, when we come down here, they also have loyalty to American Eagle and 10% of this group have talked about their demographic, personal identity, and American identity. So we really start to see something emerging here around attractiveness and my loyalty and identity. Over here in the dislikes, we can understand the very specific ways that it is offensive, that is perceived to be offensive or harmful by the smaller proportion of people who are disliking this ad. Cool, that is useful. Ooh, before this is going to take a second to it. So I promised we'd look at this two ways. We'd look at the parts, the things people are talking about, and also the values that might be informing that. So this is the exact same question. Why do you feel that way? Tell us something about you and your perceptions. But now we've used Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory in order to map the responses to the values that people are bringing to their response. What values language is showing through in their answer to help us understand what they believe, why they feel the way they do about the ad, why are they having those reactions and perceptions. If you aren't familiar with moral foundations theory, I'm not going to go on a big sort of long dive. This is really to just show how we can apply a framework that is a pre-existing framework to data in order to create understanding. But I will just draw attention to this liberty and oppression at 15% that really has to do with being oppressed or being free. So perceiving a group of people, yourself or others, to be oppressed or to have the liberty to do things. The loyalty and in-group, to belonging or to not belonging to a group. And the care or harm, the sort of protectiveness. Is anybody being hurt or harmed by this? Those three are going to become important as we have a look at that same segmentation. So here now we can look at those who like the ad, those who feel neutral about the ad, and those who dislike the ad. And we can see really clearly that those who dislike the ad are concerned about care and harm. Somebody is being hurt by this ad, and that is really important to me. That's what's coming through in my language. And also something that is important is being degraded. Remember that as we come back in just a second and to the next segmentation. So degradation and hurt are driving this, a concern for those things, driving dislike. In the we can see the freedom to express, the freedom to talk, the freedom to say things that might not be politically correct, and in group. I feel seen and understood and a part of a group. And then in the neutral, we see freedom, but less of the in-group. So again, really interesting insight into what's driving those perceptions and those associations. So all of this, we said, cool, we understand why it's viral. We can map the likes and dislikes. They've really tapped into this liberty freedom language and into an in-group thing. We can see a lot of things that are working, but hold up, wait, one more final twist. American Eagle's targeted audience is actually young women, and approximately 2/3 of them dislike the ad. So why do they dislike the ad? Now I've done a really fun thing here that you may love or you may hate. I've put those two code frames together. So in the top half, we have the most important parts, the driving parts of the first code frame that is created based on the reasons, the parts that are being talked about. And then we also see the mapping of loyalty and in-group and of care and harm down below. And so what we can see is that among the 2/3 of women who dislike the ad, there is a really strong concern with offensive or harmful outcomes from the ad, in particular around the sexualization and objectification of women. Also around racial controversy, but more so around the objectification of women, with that being harmful and hurting women. Among the 1/3 of young women who do like the ad, really has to do with that attractiveness and appeal, but also with the loyalty to the brand and with an in-group association with sort of true blue American identity. So those three pieces coming together, but only 1/3 of young women fitting into that category. So hopefully all of this helps you to really see how nuance and detail in the themes allows us to organize themes in a way that can then be segmented to give really interesting insights into the drivers of behavior, beliefs, drivers of beliefs and behavior that show up in our survey data. We're going to now go from that, pulling it all together, to cool. As we know, many teams are bringing more thematic coding in-house. This used to be a thing that you absolutely sent your thematic coding out. You waited weeks or at least days to get it back. You got it back. It was sort of mediocre. Maybe you then sent some notes out to your coding house. That's not really the way anymore. More and more teams are bringing it in-house and helping it need to move really quickly to align those open-ended analysis timelines with your closed-ended analysis. So Jen's going to talk about how you set your team up for success a quant team or your qual team for success to be able to do more of this work in-house.
Perfect, thanks. So we're first going to talk about making robust themes that are nuanced, detailed, and accurate. So the first part of that is we really need to study the research goals and the research questions and the strategic questions first before we do anything else. I remember when I was a junior analyst, I was always pestering people to send me the memo, send me the meeting notes from the client meetings that I couldn't sit in, just so that I could get a sense of what the clients actually wanted out of their research. So it's really important to make sure you're sharing that context with your team. And I can say for a fact, having some background before getting started really does make a big difference when it comes to actually doing the analysis well. And in addition to that, especially when multiple people are touching the project, which more often than not is the case, goals should be really distributed across the team effectively. So after that, after the team knows about the goals and the research questions and strategically what's important, before we go and start making the themes, we need to put in some time and effort upfront to sense making. I know everybody right now is obsessed with efficiency, is obsessed with getting AI to help us get things done quickly, but it's really important to actually know our data. Anybody who does analysis on anything should know their data well. And it's really important, especially when we are guiding, the humans are guiding the AI to help us with our coding. So in order for us to effectively guide the AI, we actually need to know what we're looking at. So after we know our research goals, after we've done a bit of sense making, then everyone should get aligned on what level of granularity is needed. So again, this is dependent on the purpose of the study and your own research goals. Maybe broad topic categories are all that's needed, especially if there's a time crunch. Or maybe on the flip side, if it's a very complex project with very specific questions that need to be answered, maybe a more nuanced and detailed code frame is needed. Regardless of what the case is, the team should be aligned on what that level of granularity should be. At Fathom, we are often using inductive coding. So in other words, we're building themes from what emerges for us in the raw data. And in our Fathom tool, the AI actually creates a first pass at those themes, which essentially is a first pass at the inductive coding. And then our coders then use those suggestions and builds the code frame. And then the human refines those code frames, groups them together from top down. And then remember, when you're making a theme during this stage, using working theme names is perfectly okay. Perfection when it comes to naming isn't really necessary at this step, but it is in our next step, which is after you've made most or all of your themes, then organization comes next. And in order to organize the themes strategically, again, we'll want to revisit the research questions and the goals just to have them fresh in our minds, or especially if a different person, a different coder, a different team member hops in at this step, they'll definitely want to do some of that upfront refresh on the goals and also sense making of the data as well. Then we look at the themes themselves and we look for overlapping themes. So in other words, ones that are too similar to collapse them together. And in parallel, the themes that are sensibly should be grouped together, we'll put them into strategic clusters at this step. This organizing stage is also when you'll want to refine your theme names and group names. So when in doubt, I, during coding, like to ask, does the way that this theme or group name, like the way that it's named, answer the actual question that was posed? And for us at Fathom, theme names are actually really important for two reasons. So the first reason is that the AI is tagging responses to themes in our tool. So essentially the name is like a mini prompt that the AI can use for its tagging process, which means that the theme needs to be descriptive and accurate for the AI to map well. And also simultaneously, the theme names and the group names need to be able to communicate insights easily to the research audience, other humans, researchers. So that means theme names should and also can accomplish both at the same time, because if it's done well, the theme name should be descriptive to both the AI and actual people and contain the same information. And remember, in this step, iteration is key. It's most definitely going to happen. Organization is never really linear, and rounds of iteration is probably going to be needed until those patterns feel really coherent. And then when organization is complete, the team should do a few quality checks. So my team at Fathom, we first look at contradictions in the code frame. So are any themes in tension with others? Are they in disagreement with any other themes? Or if any of the themes are conflated with other themes. So that means, again, we would go into the actual verbatims view and read through under a theme, do those verbatims hang together sensibly? And under a group, do all of those verbatims sensibly belong together? Then we look at the granularity of the themes. So basically, is there a good balance between the depth and the breadth of what is in the code frame? And does that level of depth and breadth actually answer the research questions that were posed? We then verify a bunch of metrics, for example, the percentage of coverage versus leftovers, which is basically the proportion of responses that were tagged versus responses that were not tagged to any themes. And at Fathom, our coverage is usually 98% and above. We work really hard to make sure all of the interesting nuggets actually make it into the code frame. And also in this step, we'll check other things like, again, accuracy of the tagging and multi-coding as well. And finally, when you feel like the code frame is in a really good place, if you can get a gut check from fresh eyes, in my experience, qualitative analysis can always be improved upon, and a different set of eyes and a different perspective can definitely catch things and minimize bias as well. And arguably, the first step to all of this is designing a survey with really good questions. And on our Fathom website, there's a bunch of resources for that as well.
Awesome. So we're going to keep this last section, the how Fathom helps, a mini demo, really sort of short and concise. Normally, I would talk lots here about how Fathom is unique in the level of nuance and detail and granularity that it gives you, and about how it is human and AI working together, and how it gives you hierarchy and all of these things. But we just talked about all of that as being good principles. So I assume that those are the things we've been working on building into Fathom. Instead, I'm going to just move really quickly for those of you who have never seen the platform, through a couple of key functions, how the flow actually works in Fathom, to give you just a quick look at the platform itself, and then we'll move right over to Q&A. For those of you who already know Fathom, well, be thinking of those questions because we'll come to Q&A in just a sec. And it's not often you get to pick Jen's brain as a person who codes more data than anyone else. So how Fathom helps, a mini demo. The first thing you're going to do when you are working with Fathom is upload your data into Fathom and input some strategic guidance. Jen has talked a ton throughout about the importance of strategic alignment, of goals, of strategy in open-ended coding. And right from the beginning with any data set, you're going to provide a bit of that detail about your goals, about your strategy. You're going to upload a CSV or an SPSS. You're going to indicate whether this is bespoke, so creating from the ground up based on the data, or whether you have an established code frame, a tracking data set that maybe you're importing or that is already saved in Fathom. For those of you who are already Fathomers, that functionality is now added. If you haven't seen it yet, you can reuse code frames from within Fathom, and you're also going to let us know if you need translation at this phase, which happens in line with any data set. And then you're going to go focus on other things. There are two different ways to work with Fathom, Fathom Magic and Fathom Pro. If you are working with Fathom Magic, Jen's team is going to do that human supervision for you, and you're going to get a notification about 24 hours later that says you're ready to jump into analysis. All the human supervision is done. Jump right in and get into analysis. If you're working with Fathom Pro, you will get AI suggestions 5 to 15 minutes later, and you'll jump in and be able to work with the data to create your nuanced themes. Always in Fathom, it's a combination of AI and expert human oversight, and that's how we get the really high quality coding in the interactive dashboard, where you will have the hierarchical code frame with nuance, detail, and accuracy, and where you'll be able to click through to the verbatims and be able to pull any of those exemplars for reporting. You can also demonstrate any quant variables here, so see the demographics of all of the verbatims to help all of that come to life. Regardless of if you're working with Fathom or with Pro, you're going to be able to refine and control your code frame. So if you are a Pro user, if you're a DIY, if you are the human that is in the loop, then you are going to work with those AI suggestions to refine and control the code frame. To be able to add, remove, or refine suggested themes, to be able to reorganize themes and the groups to suit your needs, or to be able to merge or omit themes from analysis or create new themes completely from scratch, if for whatever reason there was a strategic question that you had that the AI didn't know you needed a theme in order to help answer. If you are working with Fathom Magic, you will always be able to jump back in and make any of these tweaks once you have your data already human supervised, which is really helpful in case a new research question comes up and you need to change something to be able to answer that question. And then, of course, it's going to support you in your analysis. So you can analyze with all of the strategic segments that we just looked at. I'm going to sort of skip over this because we just did a lot of look at this in the example. But one thing we didn't look at is that there is also statistical support in Fathom that will draw your attention to where there is statistically significant variance in the distribution of themes and also support you in the analytics of your segments. What are the specific drivers, the specific ways that each of your segments are relating to the question? And last but not least, you will get support with your reporting, being able to generate insights at theme level, at the question level, at the full survey level. Based on all of that accurately coded data, the coding always happens first before any insights are generated, before any analysis is done, which is really important. That's how we make sure that you don't end up with hallucinations in any of the insights and reporting. Nonetheless, it's always really transparent and editable. So you can always see exactly where in the data that's coming from with all of the quantification in there and make sure that you understand that. I would be remiss if at this point I didn't mention that we are on the cusp of launching our interactive query-based research assistant that will allow you to ask pretty complicated research questions and get a really transparent walkthrough of the analysis that happens and the answer that comes from that. So really excited to share that with you all very soon. All of that comes together to make coding, analysis, and reporting a delight. We have wonderful people who are our partners, our Fathomers, a couple wonderful quotes from some of our favorites. If you are not quoted here and you are on the call, you are also some of our favorites. Everybody is our favorites. And we have a wonderful community and do a lot of this kind of stuff as well with our community. So if you haven't had a chance to have a look at Fathom and you would like to see more, definitely encourage you to book a demo. We'd love to give you a chance to kick the tires, try a little data set, and give Fathom a try to start streamlining really high quality thematic analysis and coding for your data. So I'm going to come out of the screen share.